We are on the doorstep of the festival of Passover. Pesach is coming up this week, and this is, of course, the festival that commemorates and relives the founding event of our nation. Our people went down to Egypt and were tormented and enslaved and oppressed for many, many years. And the Almighty extracted us with great miracles and signs and wonders. And we left on the 15th day of Nisan, and that day, and that 7-day period really, was established as the festival of Pesach to remember and relive the wonderful miracles that the Almighty did for our people. So, of course, there's a lot to talk about, and one of the ways I like to talk about a lot of different things is to give a little snippet, a little taste of some of the various different ideas that intersect on this holiday. Of course, we have the Seder, the Seder the first night, the Seder the second night. We have the splitting of the sea. We have the 10 plagues. We have the matzah and the chametz. There's so much going on. We have the whole theme of enslavement and redemption. The Exodus is mentioned dozens and dozens of times in the Torah. There are so many mitzvos that we say, Zecher li'etzias Mitzrayim, even mitzvos that don't seem to be directly related to the Exodus are attributed to the Exodus. This is the founding. There's so much here. And what I wanted to do is to kind of take a little snack in some of the different areas and to frame the discussion with 5 different questions. 5 different questions that can help us maybe dig a little bit deeper into the upcoming festival of Pesach, of Passover. And we start with the matzah. The matzah is what we eat. The chametz is what we do not eat. What is the difference between matzah and chametz? Very little. In fact, how do you spell the word matzah? Mem, tzadik, hey. How do you spell the word chametz? Also, mem, tzadik, but instead of a hey, it's a ches. What's the difference between a hey and a ches? It's a tiny drop of ink. The chametz and the matzah are so close, they're adjacent to each other. The slightest of differences between these two words, and one of them is this incredible mitzvah that's called the bread of faith that brings you all the way back 3,300 years ago, back to Egypt, back to Moshe, back to the miracles and the triumphs over Pharaoh, the 10 plagues, and what we were eating then. And one of them is something that's so prohibited we cannot eat it. If someone, God forbid, eats chametz on Pesach, the Torah tells us they are cut off from the Jewish people. It's a sin that causes disenfranchisement. And what's the difference? Very, very little. If you start making matzah, and it's 18 minutes and 5 seconds as opposed to 17 minutes and 55 seconds from when you began to mix the water and the flour, those 10 seconds turn the would-be matzah into chametz. Matzah and chametz, leavened and unleavened bread, are exactly the same. They even spell the same, chametz matzah, just one little difference, slight difference. They both are composed of flour and water. And the only difference is just slight difference, a subtle, slight difference differentiates between the two. And this maybe is one of the overarching themes of the festival. In fact, it is called Chag HaMatzos, the festival of matzah, or of matzos, of multiple matzah. And it maybe reveals to us that the difference between redemption, salvation, exodus, and enslavement is maybe very subtle. It's maybe finer than we would have otherwise thought. The difference between us freeing ourselves of the various pharaohs ruling over us today and us accepting the dominion of God and achieving ultimate existential freedom, it is very subtle. Chametz versus matzah. And what's interesting, and this is going to be question number 1, is where does this first appear? Where does matzah first make its appearance in the Torah? The first person to bake matzah that we are aware of is a man named Lot. Lot is Abraham's brother-in-law and nephew. He's Sarah's brother. And he is following Abraham along the same path, but then they diverge. And Lot goes to Sodom and Gomorrah. And the Almighty is fed up with Sodom and Gomorrah. They're too sinful. They're beyond the point of no return. It's time to overturn them. He sends some angels. Go overturn the city, but save Lot. And they arrive to the city, and Lot meets them, and Lot is still influenced by Abraham, and he sees guests, and he runs over to them, and he says, "Come, let me feed you, let me take care of you." And they said, "No, we'll stay in the street, we'll sleep here, we refuse, we politely decline." But Lot is persistent, and he pesters, and he insists, and they come to his house, and he makes them a feast. Chapter 19 of Genesis, verse 3, Umatzos alfa, and he baked matzos, and they ate it. And Rashi says, why did he bake matzah? Abraham baked bread. Why did he bake matzah? Rashi says two words that make our head spin. It was Pesach. That's it. It's Pesach. And everyone has lots of questions. Wait a minute. It's Pesach. Abraham doesn't even have a child by that time. Isaac isn't born, Jacob isn't born, Levi isn't born, Levi's sons aren't born. Like, we're so far away. We're generations and generations away from going down to Egypt, much less leaving Egypt. Yet, this is the day of Passover, or the day that in the future will be Passover. And therefore, Lot somehow knows that the appropriate thing to do right now is to bake matzah. If you do the calculation, this is exactly 401 years before the Exodus. Exactly 401 years. How come? It's a bit complicated, but those same angels previously were by Abraham, promised Abraham that in a year they will have a son, Abraham and Sarah. And indeed, Isaac was born exactly a year later. And we know that the birth of Isaac was also on the day of the Exodus, but it was exactly 400 years prior to the Exodus. So this is 401 years prior to the Exodus. So how Lot knew what he knew is a very interesting question. But it is fascinating that the first person who bakes matzah in the Torah, the first person who exercises that we know of, who exercises an act of Exodus, is Lot. Now, Lot's a very complicated figure. On one hand, he departs from Abraham, goes to Sodom and Gomorrah, loses much of his family there. But he does have some redeeming qualities. He's like Abraham welcoming guests. And he is actually an antecedent of Messiah. How so? Because when he leaves Sodom and Gomorrah with his two daughters and his wife initially, she turns around and it doesn't end well for her. They leave and they assume that the whole world is destroyed in a way similar to what happened in the flood. And they're in a cave, and his two daughters say, well, what's going to be? We have to have continuity to the world. And on successive nights, they sleep with their father, and they bear two sons, the forebearers of the nations of Ammon and Moab. So all Moabites come from this consanguineal relationship, this incestuous relationship. And we know the most famous Moabite is Ruth, the great-grandmother of King David and the matriarch of Messiah, and thus Lot, in this weird, twisted way, Lot is the grandfather, the great-grandfather, the antecedent, the ancestor of Messiah. Now, it's also interesting, if Lot baked them matzah because it was Pesach, well, what else happened that night? That night, there was an exodus, not from Egypt, but from Sodom. Why? Because Lot was told, we're going to overturn the city, but the angels tell him we're going to overturn the city. It's time to leave. And he leaves and he rushes out in a way very reminiscent of what happens 401 years in the future, where the nation escapes Egypt and they rush out. So there's something very important about Lot, that he's almost simulating the Exodus himself, and he baked the matzah first. There's something noteworthy. It's an interesting question to ponder. I think we can perhaps suggest an idea, and maybe there's more ideas. Lot is a very complicated figure, someone who has a little bit of Abrahamic tendencies. Our Seder tells us that he looked like Abraham. They resembled each other physically. His visage, his countenance was similar to that of Abraham. Yet there's some trouble with him, but he has this transformation that in some way is reminiscent of the future Exodus. What do we learn about Lot? He's with Abraham. He departs from Abraham. He chooses Sodom over Abraham. But then he's told God is overturning these cities. And his married daughters say, we're stained. And his married sons-in-law laugh at him. You're a fool. Were you worried about these cities are rock solid. They're built strong. These are the most powerful and rich, affluent cities in the world. We're not worried. They thought he was an absolute lunatic to worry about the cities being destroyed. But Lot made a decision. He made a decision to leave Sodom. That's where he went, that's where he chose, and that's where he abandoned. And there's something very remarkable about that. Lot was in a troublesome environment. He was trapped in the quagmire of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he managed to extricate himself from that. He managed to leave that, to leave it completely behind. And that act of being in a bad situation and uprooting yourself, no matter how painful it is, and no matter how ridiculed you are, to leave and to go out and to depart and to forfeit and abandon your place of comfort, to choose something better and something new, even though it's painful and difficult, that outrageous act of change is a story that symbolizes the Exodus for us. Lot was troublesome. There's problems with him. We see his story is quite ignoble. It's not something that we want to emulate. But there's still something very remarkable, and there's a little picture, a little window into the transformation of the Exodus in the story of Lot. Matzah is about leaving something behind. Leaven stays outside of the matzah. There isn't a speck of leaven in the matzah. Our sages tell us that the leaven is emblematic. It resembles the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the foreign god, the Pharaoh within us. When we choose matzah over chametz, we're saying we don't want any leaven, we don't want any of the Yetzer Hara, we don't want any of the foreign god, we don't want any of Pharaoh. Not a speck of Pharaoh remains. Lot symbolized that, not a speck of Sodom remained. The central element of the Exodus and Matzah and Pesach is to leave the person that you were yesterday and to embark on becoming someone, something new. It's a story of change. And Lot is a very good person to represent this. He had all sorts of other problems that maybe he did not escape from. And that's well documented. His story is well documented in the Torah. But he left Sodom. He changed. And that is an example of what we're trying to do. There are great people. There are pristine people in our story. And then there are troubled, checkered people in our story. Even the troubled, checkered Lot had a transformation on Pesach, and he baked matzos, and he achieved a measure, a modicum of Exodus on that night. This is our marching orders for this festival: to change, to leave Egypt behind, whatever that may be, to leave Pharaoh behind, to leave the Yetzer Hara behind, to leave Sodom behind. And unlike Lot's wife, leave it behind and don't look back. It's one idea. It maybe seems to be a tangential idea. Lot's role in Passover and the matzah story and why that's significant. But that's what we're trying to do, to get a little flavor of some of the different ideas. Let's move on to question number 2. Pesach. What does Pesach mean? It means pass over. What does pass over mean? It means to jump, to skip, to pass over. What does that have to do with the Exodus? Why is this the name of the Exodus? Why is this the name of the paschal offering, the Korban Pesach? Well, when it was time for the Exodus, we have a whole nation amidst another nation. 2 nations that are interwoven and interconnected. And there's very little difference between the Israelites and their Egyptian neighbors. They're both idolaters. But one group says we want to re-embrace the values, the traditions, the morals, the God of Abraham. And we're willing to do what it takes to leave. And they select a paschal lamb. And they affix it to their bed. They tie it to their bed. And they watch it for 4 days. And then they slaughter it, notwithstanding the fact that this animal was the deity worshipped by Egyptians, both the actual Egyptians and their Israelite emigres. And then they take the blood and they smear it on their doorposts and on their lintels. And they close their door and they don't open it. In every Jewish family that did that, when God was sweeping through Egypt, killing every firstborn, he passed over the houses that had on their door that blood. He jumped, he skipped those houses. And this is why the festival is called Pesach. That's why it's called Passover. Because God jumped, so to speak. This seems like a very side point, a tangential point to the story. It's a sideshow to the Passover Exodus story. Why is this the name of the festival? So if you look at Exodus chapter 12, verse 11, we have a description of how the paschal offering is supposed to be eaten. You have to be all dressed, Moshe tells the nation. You have to have your belts buckled and your shoes on your feet and your walking stick in your hand. You are ready to go. You don't leave any time to get ready. You have to be ready. And you should eat it b'chipazon, very fast in a hurriedly manner. Why? Because Pesach hu Hashem, it's a Pesach, it's Passover. Now, what does that mean? So Rashi says that the paschal offering, the Passover lamb, both the one that they brought in Egypt and subsequent ones, it's named the Passover lamb because of God jumping, God skipping. Because God would jump and skip over the homes of the Israelites. You have 2 neighbors. One's an Egyptian. One is an Israelite. They're neighbors. They're maybe indistinguishable. But God leaps over, jumps over, skips over, so to speak, the home of the Israelite and strikes the Egyptian neighbor. And if you have a Jew between 2 Egyptians, strikes the Egyptian, jumps over the Jew, strikes the Egyptian. And then Rashi adds, this is supposed to be instructive for us. When we do the mitzvos, it should be done in a manner of skipping and jumping. When we do mitzvos for the sake of heaven, when we bring the paschal offering, it should be in a manner of jumping and skipping. Now what, pray tell, does it mean to do a mitzvah, to bring a paschal offering in a manner of jumping and skipping? What does that even mean? We're supposed to skip and jump with the paschal lamb? It's a very strange comment in Rashi. Oh, God jumped over the Egyptians. When we bring the paschal offering, for years, for centuries, every Pesach, every Jewish family brought a paschal lamb. And we're supposed to bring it in a manner of jumping and skipping. What does that mean? And my grandfather, blessed memory, used to say, very powerful insight. An idea that can change our Pesach. We have a roadmap. There is a roadmap for how to become a greater person, a better person, a more elevated person. There is a roadmap. And that roadmap says it's a ladder. You take rung by rung by rung. And you try to skip a rung, you will careen to the floor. It's counterproductive. You don't jump, you don't skip. That roadmap, that playbook is discarded on Pesach. When we bring the paschal offering, when we do anything that relates to Pesach, we do it in a manner of skipping and jumping. We jump, we skip, we leap. We leapfrog levels that otherwise would be dangerous to do. The nation, our sages tell us, right before the Exodus, they were on the brink of spiritual destruction. They were on the 49th level of impurity. If they had fallen to level 50, our sages tell us, it would have been over. They would have been destroyed like the Egyptians. In one moment, in one revelation, in one night, they went from minus 49 to plus 49. In one brilliant flash, a leap, a transformation, a giant, great leap forward. And it wasn't harmful. It wasn't destructive. In one night, they were shown what they're capable of. Now, it is true that the following day, they went back to zero. Not minus 49, not plus 49, zero. And the ensuing 49 days, they went up one level per day. And then 49 days later, they were ready for level 50, which is the sign of revelation. But what happened that night? It was a moment of grand, rapid, dramatic transformation. The small and gradual progressive steps are for the rest of the year. On Pesach, we leap. We can have similarly dramatic turnarounds on Pesach. Even someone who is on the brink of absolute lowest level can have a complete spiritual metamorphosis on this night. This is an important idea. Most people say, oh, it's a nice idea, and they don't do anything about it. You're sitting by the Seder, and if you're locked into the messages and the themes and the insights and the powers of the day, you're able to achieve so much more in your quest for greatness than you could otherwise do any other night. This is the power of the day, and this was present 400 years before the Exodus. 401 years. Lot understood, okay, now we have to eat matzah. Because that's one of the ways to really get in our head what we're trying to do. We're trying to clean away all the leaven, all of those foreign gods, all those things that are taking over, that are encroaching, that are metastasizing within ourselves. All those things, we have to remove it. And that's one of the ways that we can kind of channel and experience and absorb some of the transformative powers of the night. Normally, you gotta use a scalpel. I know this is an analogy. You don't use a chainsaw normally. It's a scalpel. This night, you pull out the chainsaw. Dramatic leap. That's the order of the day. Let's move on to the third idea. The Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt for how long? For a long time. Now, why were they enslaved? What did they do wrong to be worthy of this? That's a very serious question. And this question is addressed, of course, in the Talmud. But what we know for sure from the text of the Torah This was in the cards for a very long time. In fact, chapter 15 of Genesis, God tells Abraham, Yodoa Teda, you should surely know that your descendants will be foreigners in a land that's not theirs, and they will be enslaved, and they will be tormented for 400 years. And then they'll leave with great wealth, and the nation that will oppress them, I will judge. This is by an event called the Bris Bein Absarim, the covenant between the parts. Now, by the way, that happened, this covenant, on the same day, Passover. It was 29 years to the day before the angels came to Lot, 30 years to the day before Isaac was born, and 430 years to the day before the day of the Exodus. God tells Abraham before Abraham even has a child, 30 years before Isaac is born. You should know for sure this is going to happen. You'll be in Egypt for 400 years. You'll be in a land that's not yours for 400 years. What did Abraham do to deserve this? Why must Abraham's descendants, why must the chosen people undergo such a harsh period of pain, of suffering, of enslavement? It seems like the only way the nation can arrive at Sinai to receive the Almighty's Holy Torah, it's only if it is preceded by many centuries of suffering. Why? When Abraham was told about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, he started praying, well, what if there's righteous people? What if there's 50 or 45 or 40 or 30 or 20 or 10 righteous people? Abraham protested the verdict of destruction, of annihilation of Sodom and Gomorrah. God tells Abraham, your descendants will be for 400 years enslaved, and Abraham doesn't say a word. He just accepts it. He doesn't resist. He doesn't push back. He doesn't protest. Obviously, Abraham understood that this is good, that this is necessary, this is a prerequisite for becoming the chosen people. In fact, in chapter 4, verse 20, it's an easy verse to remember, 4:20, in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, the description of the centuries in Egypt is a kur habarzel, an iron crucible. What does that mean, an iron crucible? Rashi tells us it's a vessel in which you purify gold. What was it like in Egypt? It was something similar to the experience that gold undergoes when it is put in an iron crucible and it's purified. You want gold, but it's mixed in with all sorts of alloys, all sorts of contaminants. And you want to remove those contaminants. It's not pleasant. Nobody wants to be in 200 or 2,000 degree Fahrenheit heat. But ultimately it's beneficial because now you emerge as more pure and refined gold. It seems like when Abraham is told about it, when he doesn't resist, and when post facto, when there's the retrospective of the Egyptian experience, it's described as some transformation that is resembling the purification of gold. This was constructive. This is the only way the nation can emerge as pure gold. The only way that the nation can be deserving of Sinai is if they underwent this experience. And the answer, the explanation, is one that you won't like. And you'll say, no, I can have it even without that. But this is the only way that it can be done. And this is a bigger discussion. Again, we're just trying to get a little snack here. A little Passover hors d'oeuvre. A little taste. A little something to just get a little flavor. But this is the idea. When God came to give the nation the Torah, he went to every other nation. Do you want the Torah? Well, what's in it? Don't murder. Don't murder. No, that's what we have. That's what we do. Sorry, we can't accept it. What's in it? Don't steal. What's in it? Have morals and ethics and values and fidelity. Sorry, not for us. He comes to the Jews, na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will listen. What enabled the nation to say na'aseh v'nishma, which is the only possible portal to Torah? It was only because this nation was trained in how to be subservient, in how to be completely subservient. Torah is only possible to be accepted by those who say, God Almighty, I accept everything without any questions. You need to be trained for a very long time to be able to do that. If you're not trained, if you hadn't experienced centuries of training, you're not able to do that. If there's a convert, potential convert, who says, I accept every single mitzvah, with the exception of one. There's only one mitzvah out of the millions of mitzvahs. There's 613 categories of mitzvah, but there's really millions of mitzvahs. There's one mitzvah I don't accept. I'm 99.999999%. I accept wholeheartedly. One thing I don't. You know what that potential convert is told? Bye-bye. You're not a candidate. You have to have total acceptance. You have to simulate, again, na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we'll listen, and we're not going to ask questions. That's the only way, the only portal to Torah. And that is very humbling. And we're like, we can't do that. Oh, no. What if I don't like it? What if I don't accept it? What if it's bothersome? What if it's difficult? There has to be a complete and total subservience in order to have Torah. The nation, gold they were, but they had to be refined to such a degree that they could completely and totally 1,000,000% accept the dominion of God. And they spent 400 years in Egypt preparing. And they became such committed slaves to Pharaoh, so to speak, that all they needed is just to switch ownership. Okay, now all of your allegiance to Pharaoh, just transfer it to allegiance to God. Once Moshe said, I want to save you. Come listen. And they couldn't even hear him because they had such shortness of breath and they were so consumed with work. That's the point where they became complete servants to Pharaoh. And very, very quickly, 10 plagues that switched, that altered, that transferred that allegiance to God. Boom, you're ready for Sinai. Abraham does not protest because Abraham understood that, painful though it may be, this is what it takes to become God's chosen people. You need to have it. It's a prerequisite. It's part of the bargain. Abraham said yes. The people maybe didn't understand it, but in retrospect, they understood this was an iron crucible. Question number 4. There are dozens and dozens of mitzvos that are linked back to the Exodus. We get to all the festivals, even Shabbos. We say Zecher li'yetzias Mitzrayim as a remembrance for the Exodus. Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, of course Shavuos, obviously Pesach, but many, many other mitzvos. Zecher li'yetzias Mitzrayim as a remembrance for the Exodus. The Shema we say twice a day. The tefillin that we wear. All that is somehow linked to the Exodus. If you think of the Exodus as simply a way to achieve the end of salvation, to be freed from bondage, it makes no sense why so many mitzvahs are connected to it. And why it's so central. Why is the Exodus so central? Now, there's an essay that I've spoken about many times, and Whenever I talk about this essay, I tell you what my grandfather said about this essay. Everyone needs to know it by heart because it's so important. And this essay you'll find in the final verse of Parshas Bo. This is in chapter 13 of the book of Exodus, chapter 13, verse 16. The Ramban, Nachmanides, has a whole essay to answer this question. And I would encourage everyone to read it because it's very interesting. And it offers not just the verse is talking about the tefillin. It's one of the four sections, the four scrolls that go into the tefillin. But it comes right in the aftermath of the Exodus. And the Ramban says, he gives a whole history of heresy and where they went wrong, where Enosh went wrong, and the various different types of heresy. And then he talks about how the heresy was completely torpedoed at the Exodus. The story of the Exodus is a story of complete and total faith and the repudiation of every type of heresy. Some people say, well, the world doesn't have a creator. Some people say the world doesn't have an overseer. Some people say that God doesn't know. Some people say that God doesn't care. All these different flavors of heresy. Some people say that God doesn't communicate with humanity. There's no prophecy. Different types of heresy, and each one of them was addressed in the Exodus story. And God does not do that for every person. Every wicked person, every heretic, every person says, well, God, show me, split the sea and then I'll believe. It doesn't work like that. This is a masterclass. The story of the Exodus is a masterclass of faith. Every single question of faith, every single challenge of faith was addressed and was completely and permanently resolved by the Exodus. And therefore, this is the touchstone of faith for all time. In future generations, it's been 3,300 years. We haven't had the splitting of the sea in a while. Now, yes, the sea split or the river split for Joshua, and some of the great sages in the Talmud had a sea splitting event. But it hasn't been for our nation for a very long time. And therefore, it's imperative that we never forget the story. Some people say, well, the Exodus happened a long time ago. Maybe we could have some newer stories to talk about. The Ramban is addressing that question. Many, many mitzvos to remember the Exodus. Why? Because when you remember the Exodus, it automatically solves all your dilemmas of faith. All the challenges of faith. God doesn't exist. The world existed forever. God doesn't know what's happening. God doesn't care what's happening. God does not communicate to us. All those things, God doesn't have mastery over nature. All those variants of heresy were completely addressed and thoroughly and resoundingly dispelled with the Exodus. And that's why it's telling us everything we need to know about faith. And that's why we revisit every angle of the story. Every beat in this march is repeated, is relearned, relived, because doing that gives us that touch point with total faith. It's a very important essay. I would encourage everyone to read it because my grandfather said, you have to know it by heart. And I was thinking, do I know it by heart? I know much of it by heart. It's a pretty long piece. So I don't know if I fully fulfilled what he wanted, but I definitely know the piece well enough, I think, to qualify. It's almost by heart. But I would recommend everyone read that because that's a powerful idea and it shows us why this story is so important. Let's move on to the fifth and final question that we're going to address. The matzah. It's a confusing food because we're told multiple different things about it in the Hagaddah. The Hagaddah is the canonized guide to the night of the Exodus. And there's 15 different stages of the Hagaddah and the Seder. And it's very specific as to what it's saying and how it's saying. And it tells us two opposing things about the matzah. We start off the Seder with a sentence called Ha lachma anya. This is the paupers' bread, the poor man's bread, that our antecedents ate in Egypt. We lift the matzah. This is what we ate in Egypt. You fast forward 2 hours later in the Seder, we say, Matzah zu sha'anu ochel mashuma. Why are we eating this matzah? Not because of the events before the Exodus, not because our antecedents ate this in Egypt, but because we left with great speed. And the dough that we brought out of Egypt didn't have time to rise. We baked it in a place called Sukkos. We prepared the dough in Egypt, but we left so quickly that we only baked it outside of Egypt, or outside of bondage. And then we ate it for a few weeks until the manna came down. Does it symbolize affliction, or does it symbolize freedom? We seem to see both. Now, I will tell you, according to the idea that we said earlier, that the experience in Egypt trained us to be subservient. We were subservient before the Exodus. We were subservient after the Exodus. The only difference is who was the master. We're slaves before, we're slaves after, slaves to Pharaoh, slaves to God. But matzah hasn't changed. Matzah symbolizes the bread of slavery. There's a good slavery, there's a bad slavery. That's one idea. There's another idea. Our nation is compared to the sand and the stars. We can reach tremendous heights, or we can reach the absolute nadirs of humanity. Both of those are symbolized by the matzah. Who eats matzah? Someone who cannot afford anything better. Who else eats matzah? Someone who's so busy and consumed with more important things that they have no time to eat or to focus on a lavish meal. Someone's very poor, can't afford anything more. Flour and water, it's the simplest thing. Suppose someone is so busy, they're a mogul. They're making a ton of money. They're on top of the world. They don't spend time with trivialities like lunch. They'll wolf down their lunch by their table, by their desk, because they're making so much money. They're being so productive. They're using the time in such a powerful way. There's two people eat matzah. Those who are enslaved, nothing else to do. You're enslaved to Pharaoh. You have no time to breathe. What if you're enslaved to God? What if you're elevated? You're a member of the chosen nation. You're a member of the kingdom of priests in the holy nation. The idea of focusing on food, the idea of spending time with the trivialities of what you're going to eat, it's just silly. Matzah does symbolize both. But I want to suggest maybe another idea. We have matzah before the Exodus, we have matzah after the Exodus. Even the matzah of the Exodus, we have the baking of the matzah outside of Egypt, but we have the preparation of the dough beforehand. If you analyze the story of the Exodus, we see that it happens twice. There is a sequel. Exodus, the sequel. Exodus, the redux. Exodus 2.0. The Midrash tells us there were 10 plagues in Egypt and 10 miracles in Egypt, and that was repeated outside of Egypt. 10 plagues and 10 miracles. If the story of the Exodus is a story of departure from who you were yesterday and embarking on the new you from here on going forward, the fact that we have 2 Exoduses symbolizes that when you change, you transform yourself, it is done in multiple stages. You cannot just say, I'll do it once and it'll change forever. The process of human change is complicated. You start off, you do a change, but there's a certain reversion, or at least a threat of reversion. A threat of recidivism. And you have to leave. Leave Egypt once, leave Egypt twice, maybe even a third time. The process of change is that the tzaddik, the righteous, falls down 7 times and gets up. Matzah symbolizes our departure from Egypt, departure from Pharaoh. We eliminate any speck of the foreign god, including the foreign god of Pharaoh. We did that once in Egypt. We left. we needed to do it again. And we may need to do it multiple times, maybe even up to 7 times. That is the way that we truly change. It's encouraging, even though it's demanding. It's encouraging to know that if someone changes, they leave Egypt, and suddenly they find themselves back in Egypt again. What happened? You got to leave again. That's part of the system, of the structure of change. You have an exodus, you have to leave and do another exodus, and maybe even a third, and maybe even a fourth, and maybe even a 7th. Matzah is the food that symbolizes this. We ate matzah in Egypt, we left. We ate matzah after Egypt, after we departed, because we still needed to leave. And we eat matzah today because there's still some element, some component of Egypt that we want to leave behind. It's normal to be going at this for a long time. There will come a point in time where, please God, we will not have to leave Egypt anymore. But the story of human change, it's complicated, it's multifaceted, multi-variables involved. Egypt is something we have to leave and leave again. May we all be so fortunate as to depart Egypt, as to take a great leap forward, as to maybe mimic, on some level, Lot. He left, we can leave too. To accept the dominion of God, to say, I realize that there's something golden, refined gold in being a servant of God. And to remember this touch point of faith. We left Egypt, and we learned in Egypt what it's all about. We learned everything we need to know about faith. It's a complete masterclass of faith. We do it. We relive it. These are the days of great change. Even Lot knew it beforehand, 401 years before the Exodus, and we have the opportunity to channel that ourselves. Let's take a great leap forward. Let's take a quantum leap forward. Let's jump and skip this Passover year. And who knows? Maybe this year we'll still get to celebrate it in Jerusalem. The story of redemption happens very fast. I always tell people, make sure you have your passports, because you never know when you might need it. Messiah comes today. You got to book flights to Jerusalem. Maybe it'll still happen. We have a couple of days. Who knows? But we should all be fortunate to have a happy, healthy, and kosher Passover. And please God, gain some of the valuable opportunities of change and transformation that are just easily accomplishable on these days. Chag kosher v'sameach, a happy kosher Passover. Hopefully it'll be a wonderful, inspiring, uplifting festival for all of us, including our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. We should all be redeemed from whatever is constricting us, holding us back. The word Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, which also means limitations and boundaries. It's time for boundless greatness. Great leap forward. Pass over all those steps. Jump, leap, skip. That is the order of the day. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and your feedback.